everyone. I think we're going to make a start, if that's okay. Thanks everyone for joining today's webinar on qualification reforms and what the changes will mean for employers. I'm Emma Sellers, I'm the Communications Officer at Cogent, and I'll be the moderator for this afternoon's session. I'll shortly be joined by Rachel Roby, our Strategic Apprenticeship Lead at Cogent Skills. Rachel is very experienced in the world of apprenticeships, having completed apprenticeships after leaving school herself. She has then gone on to work at apprenticeship assessment roles and has since worked with colleges, employers and training providers, and obviously now at Cogent. I'm just going to go over a few kind of housekeeping rules of how we're going to run today's session. So we are going to have all cameras off, everyone is muted. There's quite a few of us on the session, so it's just so we can all keep together. If you do, however, have any questions during the presentation, please do send them in the little chat question and answer box, which should be in the corner of your screens. We do have time for questions and answers at the end, so don't worry if we don't get to you in the middle of the presentation. So last thing, I suppose, is this session is being recorded and will be made available to you afterwards via our YouTube. I suppose without further ado, I'll hand over to Rachel Roby and we can get on with the webinar.
Hi everybody, thank you for joining this Wednesday lunchtime. I hope the weather isn't as miserable where you are in comparison to where I am. But yes, thank you for taking the time to join me today. So the focus of today's webinar is around education policy changes. There are a number of consultations that are currently out for feedback and responses. So I'm just going to spend the next 45 minutes just going through some of the key points of some of the key consultations and also talk you through a couple of policy changes that are also newly launched and newly being introduced. Next slide, please. So Cogent, who are Cogent Skills? So we are a charity that support employers across the science industry. We all come together collaboratively to address the skills issues and skills needs. We have two membership forums, the Science Industry Partnership that many of you may know called SIP, and then for our nuclear colleagues, we have the Nuclear Skills Strategy Group, an acronym of NSSG. We also have a range of other skills solutions as part of the Cogent Skills family, including consultancy, training, and endpoint assessment. Next slide, please. So the objectives of today is to provide you with an overview of the newest DFE, Ofqual, and ESFA consultations, as well as some new policies. Provide you with information on how you can get involved with those responses if you wish to be a part of the consultation feedback, and also provide you with some opinions and some initial thoughts on early impacts or initial thoughts around the impacts that some of these changes could have for you to consider individually or as part of your HR and learning and development teams in your businesses. Next slide, please. Thank you. So some headlines. So if anybody was off during February half term and you do get notifications from the Department of Education, Ofqual, ESFA, you will have come back to an inbox full of notifications around a number of consultations. As you can imagine, it was charming coming back from a week's leave to numerous consultation notifications in my inbox. So around the 24th of February, Department of Education, Ofqual, released 4 consultations, one around the regulation of academic and technical qualifications, a higher education policy statement, and then reform consultation, which is in one big document, lifelong loan entitlement, and then a review of post-16 qualifications at level 2 and below. Also during the same time frame, the ESFA released some clarification guidance on an upcoming accountability framework that they are releasing for providers, and also the Institute of Apprenticeships and Technical Education released their long-awaited degree apprenticeship policy on the 16th of March. So I've tried to put them all together. Obviously, there's quite a lot of information to go through, but I will talk you through the headlines and the main points of consideration during this webinar. Next slide, please. So first of all, starting with the academic and technical qualifications, you'll see on the left-hand side There are some links to the consultation documents. There is a letter that was written which kind of underpins some of the consultation reasonings and some of the advice and guidance that has been given to Ofqual from the Secretary of State for Education, and also a link. And you'll find that there's this theme of all of the documentation and the links within this PowerPoint. We won't be putting the links in the chat because I just feel like it could get quite confusing because there is so many different documents and links, but we will send out a copy of the slides following the meeting, and you'll also have access to the webinar if you want to re-listen. So in terms of this first Ofqual, so this is in response to the level 3 consultation that has been around for the past 2 years. So DFE consulted on level 3 in 2020. They released more guidance last year, and this is one of the kind of final pieces of the puzzle where the qualifications obviously go over to Ofqual, who are the overarching body that monitors the quality of any qualification in the country. So it's down to them now to start to look at how they're going to regulate and how they're going to look at ensuring that there is a high level, high quality delivery and high quality approach to these qualifications. And what I would say with this is they are classed as the alternative qualifications. So it's split into 2 categories: the alternative academic routes and the alternative technical routes. In the current consultation, this does not include any A-levels, T-levels or apprenticeships. This is purely for the alternative versions. Next slide, please. So within the consultation, it talks about lots of different regulatory approaches, including proposals, options, and some questions. These questions fall in line with how what the qualification should be built of, what the content should be, the grading scales, assessor judgments, titling, assessment strategies, approvals process, and the role that Ofqual should take in the approval, and then the disapplication of Ofqual requirements where applicable. So when a qualification is potentially being removed in the future, what role will Ofqual play? So just to set a bit of background, the alternative academic qualifications will be those that will be used to complement A-level study. They could be shorter programs, they may be add-ons, so they may be seen as enrichment. So for example, the project that A-level students often do that they can get graded, and that can count towards UCAS points. So kind of smaller programs, smaller complementary A-level programs or enrichment. And they are looking at how they can design, how they can be best fit value for money, making sure they're high quality and making sure that they stay relevant for students. And then the types of technical, alternative technical qualifications will be some that will enable entry into the occupation or very specialised, as well as some smaller qualifications that would be smaller than T-levels, but they may cross over with some T-level subjects already in existence or ones that are due to be rolled out. Technical qualifications that allow entry into an occupation where there isn't an occupational standard. So for those that aren't aware, any job or any apprenticeship has to be underpinned by an occupational standard, and the occupational standard is where the knowledge, skills and behaviours come from. So there will be some roles and there'll be some occupations that maybe a trailblazer group hasn't formed yet, or they haven't seen that there would be enough demand for an apprenticeship, or the role is niche and maybe not fit in a perfect box as a discrete occupation. So those kind of technical qualifications that maybe fall outside those could be classed as these alternative technical qualifications. Or you might have qualifications that look on cross-sectorial skills or really specialised qualifications. And one of the examples is that could be health and safety or first aid. So something that may complement a qualification that already exists. And these were how they'd be classified. So there's just a brief introduction as to what the consultation proposes, what they're asking, and the kind of background as to why they are doing this. This was always going to happen. Ofqual were always going to consult once we got into the later stages of the level 3 reforms, due to the amount of changes that are going to be coming to qualifications at level 3. So obviously there are different pathways that people are being will be encouraged to take, whether that's an academic route, and obviously traditionally an academic route would fall into an A-level pathway, or a technical route, which will then be split into a T-level or potentially an apprenticeship. And it's about finding out which qualifications then might not fit in those boxes, but rather than remove them, look at how they can fit into this wider model. So what does it mean for me? And as I mean me, talking about from an employer's point of view, I would say at this stage there was limited implications for you through this consultation. It wouldn't be the one that I would potentially pore over. The consultation is more for awarding bodies, awarding organisations for their consideration of what future qualifications might look like and how they will go about designing them in the future. If you currently use smaller qualifications, so if you do use smaller specific health and safety training or first aid or something that's more specialised, that isn't aligned to an apprenticeship, but it's something that you do value as part of your offer internally, that it may be worth discussing with your providers or maybe with the awarding body that certificates, just to find out a little bit more from them as to where they feel like it's going to sit in the future. And then obviously if they have concerns around where it would fit, they may ask you to get involved in the consultation and almost just kind of quantify the reasons to make sure that it does stay in the marketplace in the future. But I think at this stage, it wouldn't be the one that I would focus all my attention to, but obviously the outcomes of the consultation will have a future impact due to the recategorisation of some of these qualifications. Next slide, please. So moving on to the Higher Education Policy Statement and Reform. So this was launched by MP Michelle Donnellan. She is in the Department of Education and she is the HE Minister. So she looks after all higher education, including apprenticeships at higher levels. So again, attached the timescales, the documentation, and also the link to respond. And the policy and consultation is split into two parts. Part one was a policy statement, which was based around funding. And what I would say is they are the decisions that have already been made. And then part two was around further potential reforms. And within the consultation, it's split into three different sections. Section one around improving the quality of outcomes. B is around access to HE. And then C is around the level 4 and 5 courses. Next slide, please. So I'll talk you through both parts. Obviously, the policy statement that came out, it had certain things that were staying and certain things that were going to be changing. And again, like I'll say, this isn't a consultation. This is a statement of decisions that have been made. So fees, so they are continuing to freeze the cap on fees, so that maximum level will remain at £9,250 a year, and that will be frozen for the next 2 years. Changes to Plan 2 borrowers. So a Plan 2 borrower is anybody that has started university after 2012. So 2012-2013 academic year is classed as a Plan 2. Some of you on the call may fall into that bracket yourselves. So they are looking at maintaining the repayment threshold. So as, again, for those that do or don't know, until your salary hits the current level of £27,295, you are not expected to then start repaying your student loan. Once you hit that threshold, then you start your repayments. So they are planning to maintain that threshold for anybody that is a Plan 2, and that will include up to and including the financial year 24-25, and then they will review it. But changes for new borrowers, and this is where it can play some importance for you internally. They are going to look at reducing the payment threshold. So from 2023-2024, any new borrowers, their salary cap will be 25,000 before they would start repaying. And what they're also doing is they're increasing the amount of years that you would pay your student loan off from what is now 30 years to 40 years. So they are going to add 10 years on to how long you could pay your loan off. So again, for those that don't know, if you continue paying for 30 years and you haven't then finished paying all your loans off, it then gets wiped out after that time. So obviously that will then carry on for another 10 years, which could take somebody up to retirement, really, if it was 40 years from completing and entering a role at £25,000 or above as a graduate. So what does it mean for you? So in terms of, thoughts from myself, could this put people off going into university in the future? If that is the case, what considerations would you need to make internally? What percentage of graduates are you taking on now, and what implications could it have if that started to fall? Reviewing thoughts around what your salary bands are, and obviously what impact would that have if your individuals were already paying back their loans, from starting into a role, but also what impact could this have on the future of degree apprenticeships? Personally, if it was me, I'd be much more interested in saving my money and not paying it back for 40 years. So would the same thought be made for lots of students now? And what does that mean for the real importance of what a degree apprenticeship looks like, feels like, and achieves, if there could be more people that would be off-putting going onto the full-time route and would prefer to explore degree apprenticeships themselves. Next slide, please. And then part 2, which is where the consultation and where the questions are coming in, they are looking at introducing SCNs, which is called a student control number. This may be around the sectors, providers, or subjects. So there could be tariffs put on how many learners certain universities can take on their courses. This could look at an overall approach of how many learners within a sector government may say that they want going into degree courses in the future, and they might put some limits on this. They also might put limits on the amount of providers that can deliver certain courses, and then obviously restrict numbers, or they may put restricted numbers on the subjects. This can have pros and cons. They may really increase the numbers. So, for STEM subjects, for example, but for more maybe niche or more upcoming or more creative, some creative subjects, as an example, they may start to look at putting caps on the numbers. And also they're looking at the outcomes, and they really want to ensure that there is quantifiable data coming out with social impacts and strategic importance of what the degree programs in England are looking like. And one of those things that they would be looking at to ensure that there is a big impact is the minimum entry requirements. So they are going to look, and they are asking in the consultation whether there should be some minimum entry requirements for somebody to be able to go onto a degree program and be able to be eligible for funding. The reason why a lot of this is being discussed is because there is evidence that although obviously having that graduate status can really help and support in some sectors, in a lot of sectors across the country isn't really having an impact. So people are going to university, are paying the £9,000 a year plus their own loans, coming out with £55,000, £60,000 worth of loans attached to them, and they're not really seeing the benefits in terms of their role, their future aspirations, their career, and want to see whether or not going down a technical route or maybe taking an apprenticeship or degree apprenticeship may have a different aspect on that. So that's why some of these are being raised. Obviously, minimum entry requirements, lots of universities already have minimum entry requirements. They do expect that they want to set some ground rules around what the minimum level should be. So should that mean there's a certain level of English and maths? Should it be that they should have a certain amount of A-levels? Should those A-levels be in the subjects related to the degree subject you are going to be applying for? And then what exemptions could be in place? So one thing that they are asking around is people that enter university later in life. So they may not have gone down academic routes in their youth or in their early careers, but now they have lots of experience and they are at a level where they want to then undertake a degree. and what exemptions could be in place to not alienate them because they maybe didn't have the entry level requirements from school or from years ago, including maybe functional skills and key skills levels if they redid their maths and English. Then they're also looking at foundation year provision and what should that look like. So many people now do take foundation years, a beginner year, or they'll do a foundation access course at college to then upskill them and get them ready. So they are looking at what that should look like and how that should be paid for. They want to change the funding model for that to ensure that people aren't paying. So there is a real difference between what an FE provider charges for an access course or a foundation course versus what a university will charge. So as an example, you can go to college and do your level 4 and pay £3,000 to £4,000 or be funded for it. But if you were going to do that through a university and do a foundation degree before doing your BSc, you maybe then charge £9,000 for that starter year. So they're looking at how to simplify the funding for that. And then also they're looking at the level 4 and 5. So most people hopefully have heard of the HTQs, the higher technical education qualifications that the institute are responsible for. They want obviously that to work. They want to increase demand. They want to increase the qualifications that will get that HTQ stamp. So they're asking questions on how they can grow the market. And that will also include kind of funding fees, how funding will be claimed, and how obviously quality assurance will be underpinned in that. So in terms of what does it mean for you? So will there be a reduction in availability of degree level courses in the future? Could degree programs narrow because they want them to develop skills as well as knowledge? And what impact could this have? Could this devalue the knowledge that is currently being taught because they may have to make compromises to increase the skills elements? What impact could the minimum entry requirements have on students accessing HE? Obviously, there's a big debate around levelling up. What impact could this have? Could this have more impacts on maybe more, social mobility, helping people, rise up and maybe haven't come from an academic background? And could this alienate them even more from getting on better in life or gaining more qualifications? And also, what impacts could the introduction of more 4 and 5s have? Could this improve attainment levels? And could this positively impact your workforce in the future? I would say that for you, again, the questions are very specific in terms of the way they're worded. They're very much worded for a provider or maybe awarding bodies or maybe institutes to respond. But obviously, if it is something that really does catch your eye, you don't have to respond to all of the consultation questions. If you maybe just want to look at section A and give some feedback, or if you want to just have a scout through, there are a lot of questions, but you aren't mandated to answer them all if you do want to get involved. Next slide, please. So moving on and looking at the lifelong learning entitlement. So this is a consultation that's currently out from the Department of Education. And again, the links to the consultation and the response links are on the left. This, it has an acronym of LLE. This was announced as part of the lifetime skills guarantee that the Prime Minister announced. And this is all part of the levelling up agenda. So this is first of all, the first part of it is that everybody should be entitled to funding for a level 3. And if they haven't got a level 3 qualification, they will get funding towards this. What the lifelong learning entitlement is looking at and asking around is to be able to change the funding mechanisms to allow anybody in the country to have the equivalent of 4 years of post-18 education that they can use over their lifetime. And what the LLE will do is fund modules of courses between levels 4 and 6, as well as full-time study. And what this consultation, and this is a really early consultation, is looking at 3 themes. The themes are the ambition of the policy, the scope of the policy, and then how the policy will ensure supporting quality and flexible learning. Next slide, please. So, like I say, this is a really early stage. This is the first consultation of its kind, linked to the new policy and the new strategy. But what they're looking for in terms of the ambition, government really feel that there needs to be a more flexible and responsive skills system. And what they want to do is be able to transform the funding systems that are currently in place and make it easier to get a loan for flexible modular study. So at the moment, it is quite easy, or people have different sides of the stories of how easy it is to apply for HE funding when they go to university. And I know that it's not as easy as people make out, but they want it to be as simple and they want it to be as online and as system-led as it is for to apply for a university funding model. They want everybody, every adult, to be able to have access to an account, and you will have a pot of money that will be available then for you to use through your lifetime. And what they want to ensure that they're doing is replacing the two systems that are currently available and making one system which everybody can use. So whether or not you are applying for university, or whether or not you are applying for a short course to upskill you in a certain area that might take a few months to do, they want the same kind of system of money and system of online access to work. And then they also want to ensure that there's a good regulatory system. They feel this is necessary, and I totally agree, making sure that any money that is spent is good value, one, for the students, so that there's positive outcomes, but also the taxpayer, and also making sure that there is regulations and how the regulatory monitoring would look like. So at this stage, I don't believe there is a lot of implications for you as employers. Individually, if you're interested and maybe thinking that you could access this money to, upskill yourselves individually, then again, look at it from a personal point of view. But at this stage, I do feel like it is an individual response, or it's a central response of those that currently look after student funding and have a view on student funding in order to respond. Things to watch in the future that obviously would impact. If you currently use different funding streams outside of the levy, potentially, if you know that as an employer, you tap into other funding streams, a big common one that is used is the AEB, the Adult Education Budget. And that's quite commonly used for shorter courses or upskilling English and maths, as an example. One thing to watch out for is if they are going to be changing the funding streams, that could then impact the streams that currently are available. So that's just something to watch out for, that if they are looking to streamline, could that have future implications? Nothing has been announced at that currently, but it's just something to watch out for in the future. Next slide, please. And then the last of the 4 consultations is around post-16 qualifications at level 2 and below. So this is a DFE consultation, and you would, so consultation document, and then the link, respondent link on the left-hand side. And the proposal and the proposals at a glance are split into 8 chapters. So as you can imagine, it's a big document and it's covering a lot of ground. Next slide, please. I'm going to try my best to summarise what this consultation is looking like. So for those that may have been involved in the level 3 consultation, this is a direct replica of them reviewing entry level up to level 2 qualifications that are used in England. One of the reasons that they're doing this is there are currently over 8,000 qualifications, and they want to obviously streamline and make sure that there isn't the duplication that there is at the moment. They want to align qualifications into groups. They want to do this to provide a clearer skills system, and they want to ensure that both young people and adults have options, ensuring that flexibilities and personal circumstances are taken into consideration, and basically looking that it isn't just a 16 to 18-year-old that sometimes do a level 2 qualification, and sometimes for those older people it can be quite off-putting at the moment because the options may not feel as available. So I'm going to skip forward and then I'll come back if that's okay. So I'm just going to talk you through the next slide, please, which is a visual of how they are proposing. So it looks quite complicated. Anybody that's seen the level 3 will see that they've used kind of the same colours, but they are looking at this technical route, and this is where it's focused on. So obviously post 16, you have your you would say a straightforward academic route onto A levels or academic study. But then you are looking at, for a technical route, 6 potential options. So all of the groups are available for younger people. Those groups that are highlighted in red, so group 3 and group 6, they are for adults, so post 19 only. Young people can go into these groups, but it is just for adults to be able to use these too. And what you're looking at is different options. So you have your T-level options, you have your entry into employment options, you have your specialist qualifications, you have your cross-sectoral qualifications, you have your areas where there isn't a current standard, and then you have your upskilling route. And what they want to be able to do is group the qualifications that currently exist into these 6 pathways. And therefore, if you don't fall into a pathway, and if your qualification doesn't fall into a pathway, then there's a potential for it to be defunded in the future. And that's basically cutting a long story short. So they're looking to try and map all of the qualifications that are currently out there into a group, look at what the best qualifications within those groups are, and they will be the fundable qualifications moving forward. So looking at group 1, obviously you've got your progression. So you would have a progression program that would get you ready for a T-level, as an example. There is talk about potentially an entry-level T-level that could be designed that is more pitched at a level 2, which would then get people ready to move on to the T-level afterwards, because T-level is a level 3. You've also then got your qualifications enabling entry into occupations, which could be a level 2 apprenticeship, as an example. And obviously we know across industry that we are struggling for level 2s across the board. So it may put more emphasis on ensuring that there are enough apprenticeships at level 2 to ensure that people do have an entry route. Then you have your specialist qualifications, your cross-sectoral skills, so your team leading, your communication skills, your management skills, or entry level into team leading that you can use across sectors. And then you may have smaller niche qualifications that will then get you ready to then maybe go on to a higher pathway. And then I won't go into depth, but the next 2 slides, if Emma doesn't mind just scrolling through them quickly, is also looking at what the lower levels, so a proposed level 1 landscape would look like. So you've got different groups, you've got groups 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13, which is built up into pre-technical, complementary, and basic skills groups. And then the next slide, please, which is the entry levels, which would be your pre-technical, again, your study programs and your basic skills. Obviously, there is a wealth of qualifications currently at entry levels and at level 1. The plan will always be is that you will hopefully move up. So once you have done, so say you fall into group 14 currently, and you're going to take a pre-technical qualification. So maybe, as an example, you take a introduction into customer service as a really kind of an example. You get some basic training that might be through an internship or through a traineeship. Then you would then go on to maybe the level 1 course, or you'd be fast-tracked and you would go on to the level 2. And then once you achieve your level 2, you then move into the level 3 and above programs. And they want to ensure that there is a pathway for all individuals to have choices post 16, no matter where you end up and at what level you come out after GCSE, or if you take your GCSEs, that there is options for you depending on the route that you want to take. This also includes ESOL, so it's taken into consideration those that English isn't their first language, and making sure that there are pathways for those routes as well. So in terms of the impact for you, what does it mean? So the next slide, please. Oh, sorry, it's okay. So short term, nothing will change. In terms of if you want to get involved, the consultation is a large consultation. Nothing will come into effect until 2024. So whatever is proposed. So obviously the level 3 reforms started in 2019. They are only just going through the off-qual consultation now. So there be a long drawn out process for these, for any consultation. This will probably be the first of 3 They're getting initial views now. They will then come out again with some more refined ideas, and then they will go out for a further consultation for any final decisions. And they will obviously take it through the Houses of Lords and House of Commons as well. So at this stage, there is no initial change. Full rollout wouldn't come into effect until the 27-28 academic year, but there may be slow rollouts from 2024 onwards. What I would say, I suppose, long-term implications, and this is, really in the future, is short course options that may be used for entry levels or entry routes. What impact could that have if you use some, or if you have initiatives to help maybe lower level learners work up or develop, more skills to support them in their future career paths? These, if they don't fall into a nice box, they may be defunded, or funding may be reduced, which could make them unviable. So we just kind of need to watch this space at the moment. Obviously, personally, you may have an interest, you may have children that are entering this phase in their education, and you may have an interest from a personal point of view, but also you may have a personal vested interest because you're part of a school governing board, or people. So again, if you do want more information, there is the consultation, and I have got a summary if anybody wants to have a look at that, which just kind of breaks the consultation down into a bit of an easier guide. So those are the consultations. I'm just going to go through the an ESFA accountability framework. So as part of the skills bill and as part of the white paper, they did want to put more emphasis on accountability and compliance for training providers within the landscape. So this was always a promise that the institute that the ESFA were going to bring in. So they released a framework, a guidance that they would be implementing, and the new policy would be driven on three principles around data, risk, and encouraging self-improvement. There is also some timeliness impacts and proportionality included as well. So next slide, please, and I'll just run through what those indicators may be. So they'll be using data, ILR data, so this is data that's used by the training provider, and they'll be looking at a flagging system of at-risk or needs improvements. And what they'll be looking at is offset grades, the amount of withdrawals training providers have, feedback that employers have. So anybody that regularly gets, I'll say, pestered for feedback from their providers, they'll be more closely monitored and making sure that the 4 or 5 star ratings remain. Learners that have gone past their planned end date, the amount of learners that are on breaking learning, which again, you may have had some examples where you've put learners on breaks for during the pandemic. If you haven't already, it's you will be getting conversations with your providers about bringing them back if they're not already back. And also EPA data, they're getting a lot stricter on ensuring that learners are registered with an endpoint assessment agency early in the programme. So these will be one of the things that they'll be means testing and looking at if there's any gaps in them. What does this mean for you? I think it's quite a powerful tool for you to use as employers, to the point that for anybody that is a current SIP member, I am going to be putting on a specialised session on what this all means and how I think you can use it. As a bit of a top line headline, providers should be transparent with you about their data and ensuring that they're not falling into the at-risk category. What does at-risk mean? Well, at-risk means that there'll be more compliance views, there'll be more guidance, there'll be more help that the provider gets, but also they will be put at risk in terms of potentially losing their provision. What then happens to your learners if they do lose their access to take on new learners, or they're taken off the register and can't finish your learners? So it is really, really important that maybe you start to speak to employers and providers around what your KPIs are and what your SLAs are. But like I say, for anybody that is a SIP member, and if anybody wants any more information on becoming a SIP member and have access to the specialised workshop that I am going to put on, please feel free to make contact with us after the session. Next slide, please. And then finally, for anybody that's been involved in sessions that I've run over the past 6 months, anybody that's come to SIP Local, the SI8 group, the ASG, or generally just get our kind of SIP and NSSG newsletters, you'll know that we have been heavily involved in the apprenticeship policy for degrees. The Institute have now released their policy. It came live on the website on the 16th of March, and I've included a link, and they are going to start accepting standard revisions and new standards on the new policy from March, and then all standards will need to be submitted from September using the new policy. Next slide, please. So it was no surprise that the outcome of the policy was very much in line with what they had suggested in their consultation in the summer, due to the overwhelming response. I will add, not from SIP and not from lots of science colleagues on the calls, but they are moving ahead with all of the proposals. Those proposals include, and what they will be doing is, it won't be automatic that a degree will be mandated, and they'll be using evidence to determine whether or not a degree, whether that's a bachelor's degree or a master's degree, can be mandated. They are going to be improving and ensuring there is more emphasis on integrating on and off the job training, and making sure that providers are fully responsible for both on and off the job training. Full alignment between the knowledge, skills and behaviours that are written in the occupational standard and the learning outcomes that are in the degree, and making sure that what is covered in the degree is mapped and vice versa. Requiring integration, so we will no longer have non-integrated degree apprenticeships. They will all require integration from the provider. One implication of that will be that every university that currently delivers and wants to deliver an integrated degree will need to become Ofqual approved. And also, obviously, because of this, there will be a removal of that independence of assessment that's currently carried out by an EPAO, and therefore they're establishing rules around ensuring that there is still an element of independence, and that independence will form within a panel that will sit as a specialist within the university panel to ensure that the grading is fair. So what does it mean for you? So again, there's obviously lots of discussion, lots of debate going on at the moment. What are we looking at? So potential removal of the degree programmes, reduced fundable content, the renaming implications in terms of attraction and perception, the loss of the fully independent assessment. And I will say that that is very popular in the science industries. Lots of companies like the fact that there is an independent assessment of skills, knowledge and behaviour at the end, but also the funding reviews. So I've added funding reviews in because every time a standard goes back to the panel, you have to resubmit your funding, and therefore new funding bands can be released. And one thing that I would say is that at the moment, there's no talk of increasing the maximum funding band, which for those that know is 27,000, and quite a lot of degree apprenticeships currently are banded at 27,000, and they may not have the amount of skills and behaviours that may be needed in the standards in the future. So what implications could that have? Okay, next slide, please. So that comes to the end of the presentation. I will hand you back to Emma for any questions.
Well, thank you very much for that, Rachel. There's certainly lots of food for thought there. I'll let you rest your voice. And whilst you do that, I'll just remind everyone, you do still have a chance to add any questions you may have into the chat box or the Q&A box just before we finish. As you know, we will provide all the slides to you after the webinar. I know we have a couple of questions already, so I shall stop sharing my screens and we'll get into it.
So I can see a question in the box from Kim. I'm hoping Kim's still on the call. So if somebody took on somebody on an apprenticeship and they'd already personally used their account, could this impact our ability to hire? The answer is I'm not 100% sure, but I very much doubt it, because I don't think it will impact the levy, because the levy is an employer-based funding mechanism that you then take on. The individuals will not be expected to use their personal pot of money for an apprenticeship training. That's as far as I'm aware at the moment. But obviously, if anything changes, I will caveat that there is going to be an apprenticeship levy. tweak. I'm not going to say review because I don't want anybody to get excited, but there is obviously in the spring statement an announcement around reviewing the levy. I don't think they will introduce difficulties to use the levy for apprenticeships. I think it would be for more commercial training. So if somebody isn't eligible for an apprenticeship, they want to do a course as part of some CPD that you're happy to support with, but they're going to financially pay for, that's where there could be some barriers, but I don't think apprenticeships will come into the LLE pot. I hope that answers that.
I have a question that we got for the webinar, and that is, how can I learn more about the ESFA accountability framework?
Really good question. I'm glad that it sparked some interest, because I do think it's really important, and I'm really advocating that employers that use apprenticeships do have a look at this. We are currently waiting for the final version of the guidance. It should be out because April is when they were going to start bringing it in. I am going to put a webinar, I'm going to put a session on for people, but obviously if you want links to any guidance or any advice, please reach out and I can ping over the information that I've got. But yeah, there will be more advice out in due course once the final versions are released. I know that there was a little bit of controversy around some of the measures that were put out there in March. So I know that they went back out to providers to get some feedback. So I think they are still working their way through the final version. As soon as I have anything, it will be updated through the SIP newsletters or our social media. And then obviously when I put the session on, that'll be advertised too.
Right, thank you very much for that, Rachel. We're just running a couple of minutes over, so apologies to everyone. But thank you so much for your time today, Rachel. That was really, really helpful, I'm sure. And hopefully that has provided some really good insight into some of the changes that are likely to impact everyone. And finally, I just want to say thank you everyone for joining today's webinar. And I hope you have a great rest of the afternoon. I will email out the video of this webinar as well as the PowerPoint presentation and all the links that you may need. So thank you very much, everyone.